You guys doing good this morning? Yeah! The sun is shining. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Okay, sorry. Glad you guys are here this morning. And we're going to get started with week 3 of this series called Goals. Now, how many of you've had goals in your life? I've asked you this the last couple of weeks now. How many of you have had goals in your life that you want to accomplish? How many of those are goals that you have accomplished? How many of those are goals that you have yet to accomplish? How many of you guys have yet to set any goals? Right? No, if we're real, that's the truth. But today what we're going to be talking about is the reality that, sometimes all of us do something a little bit stupid from time to time, don't we? We have a tendency to kick ourselves in the back because we, for whatever reason, choose to do something that we know we shouldn't do, but we do anyway. Or we do something without thinking it through, and then afterwards you look back and you're like, I don't know what I was thinking, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Well, thanks for your honesty. There's a buddy of mine that I had back in college, and let me tell you, he's from Kansas, and the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and you'll be able to tell in a moment with what I'm about to show you. But he was one of those that could make anybody laugh for the stupidest reason ever. And he's one of those that you ask him to do something stupid for a laugh, and he'll do it. You know what I'm saying? And so what he's going to do, have you heard of the milk gallon challenge? You have to chug a gallon of milk in an hour and keep it down, right? That's the challenge. But here's the reality. Scientifically, your stomach cannot contain a gallon of milk in that period of time. You will barf it up, okay? So, challenge accepted. But no, listen up. Here's the thing. I'm about to show you a video that we made in college of him attempting this challenge. Now, I have to warn you, if you get queasy watching puke, I'll warn you when it happens, turn your head away. But I'll tell you, there's no chunks. It looks just as it came. It looks like he was poured out of the gallon, except, replace the gallon with his mouth, and it's milk coming out there. So, fair warning, this video contains real milk vomiting. So, if you don't like that, then turn your head at the time. I will give you warning. So, without any further ado, check out Micah Boo.
Burger here on a glorious day. Sun's out, guns out. I hear tell that everyone says I can't drink a gallon of milk in an hour. And so, for our first episode of Puke Busters, I'm going to attempt the legendary gallon challenge. And what you do is you just tip it back, and just in an hour you get it all down. Here goes nothing.
He was very committed to this.
If you think about it, the milk challenge is kind of like football.
Okay, warning. Here comes. It's not done. It's not done. Still
Well, that's the end of that. I didn't do so good at that one. A little harder than I thought it was. Milk 1, Boo Burger 0.
I cannot watch that movie without laughing my head off. Okay, so here's the thing. Many of us we are told we are told something that is true. In fact, God has given His word to us. Let's see the nice smooth transition there. God has given His word to us so that we can know what He wants for our lives, okay? And what we may do, what you've done before, what I've done before, is we look at what God says and we go, yeah, challenge accepted. And we think that even though God says there's no way this is going to work out for your benefit, we still try to chug our own milk. It's kind of a weird illustration. We try to chug what we know is not going to be good for us. We commit to doing something. Hey guys, shh. We commit to doing something that we know is wrong, that we know we shouldn't do, that we know God has said to stay away from. And we think that maybe for us it'll be different. And whether it's in the moment or it's years later, it all comes back to bite us and we realize, I wish I had blank. I wish I had done something else. Because here's the reality that we're going to discuss this morning. We all struggle with making wise choices at times. We all struggle with doing the right thing. We all struggle with, there's what we know we should do and then there's what we want to do, right? And what we want to do is more important than what that may say for our future, right? We want something now and kind of, we don't worry about the consequences. We'll worry about the consequences later. Right now I want to have fun because what's important is right now. And then later those consequences come back to us. And the reality is making wise choices isn't always easy. How many of you would say there are some wise choices that is a no-brainer? It's easy to do. And then how many do we find else that are that wise decision is not so easy to make? When it comes to cleaning your room, that might be an easy one that we still choose not to do. But it's an easy one, we get it. But then when it comes to things like, treat your sibling with love and respect, right? That one's a little bit more difficult at times because the reality is there's people that you can admire from a distance, but as soon as you start living with them, you know their deepest, darkest secrets, and you know the parts about them that bother the heck out of you. And so it's really hard to love your siblings sometimes, but the wise thing to do is not to antagonize your sibling, but to try to get along with them. But just because it's wise doesn't mean it's easy. And the third reality is we all don't always consider the consequences. Sometimes the consequences of an unwise decision are immediate. One time my buddy and I were riding four-wheelers and did not think through racing down his driveway in the four-wheelers where there was a pile of gravel at the end of it because we just weren't thinking through. We were trying to time ourselves. Well, I slowed down because I'm a safe person. Before I got to the finish line, I sacrificed a really good time in order to, stop. My buddy, not so much. He was committed to getting the best time, regardless of the consequence that there was a gravel pile about 10 feet high at the finish line. And you know what he did? The four-wheeler was removed from his butt, and he fell backwards and knocked the wind out of himself. And it was hilarious. Not for him, but for me. Because when somebody knocks the wind out of themselves and they can't breathe, and they're and then dude, and then we didn't have phones back then, but if I did, I would have been laughing, and he would have been, and you want some water? So it's everything has consequences. Sometimes we think through them, sometimes we don't. And the reality is that, wise choices aren't always easy, and sometimes choosing an unwise choice will have consequences that bite us in the moment, like that four-wheeler moment, or they'll have consequences like when you choose not to take things seriously with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and you cross a line, and now you can't take it back, and then you have to deal with that. You got to deal with the repercussions of that. And then it gets carried into your future relationships, and then you find yourself thinking, I wish I hadn't compromised. And the reality is unwise decisions will always come back to bite us. It's just a matter of when. All of our choices have consequences, some of them positive, some of them negative. The choices we make today can have a major impact on our tomorrow. In fact, there's a lot of biblical concepts that talk about this. We're going to get into some of them today. But how can we start making wise choices in big and small ways, even when it's hard to do? So Paul, when he is going around, he became a Christian just years after Jesus was raised from the dead, and he starts writing these letters to the churches that he had visited on his journeys. So he's traveled all throughout the Middle East and in Asia Minor, and he's gone into all these places, and he starts writing letters back to these churches to encourage them and to tell them about some of the wise and unwise choices they're making and what they should do to correct those things. Some of them obvious, some of them not so much, some of them simple and easy, some of them not so much. But he's writing to the church in Galatia to encourage them and to help steer them in the right direction. He's talking to them about wise choices, and here's what he says in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. He says, "You will always harvest what you plant." You will always what? Harvest what you plant. Okay, this is an easy concept, right? You guys have studied plants in school, right? You know that they take soil and water, and when you plant corn, you grow corn. This is Indiana, folks. When you plant corn, you grow corn. When you plant beans, you grow beans. When you plant unwise choices, you reap negative consequences. I probably should have led you into that a little better. Unwise consequences, right? When you harvest wise choices, you reap positive consequences. See how that works, the negative and the positive. So what we're going to talk about today is what Paul is trying to tell the church in Galatia. It's this concept that all of us are familiar with. When you plant things, they grow. And when you harvest those things, you reap the benefits of that crop. And so when you plant things that are good, you will reap a better future. When you only plant what living in the moment does for you right now, you will reap those consequences later. Every decision we make today is going to grow or harvest something in our lives later. And here's the thing. When we're living our lives, when we're making our decisions, when we're going to class, when we're going to practice, when we're hanging out with friends, when we're watching movies late at night on Netflix, we have the opportunity to make wise choices or unwise choices. And the goal is to live your life now with the end in mind. Live your life now with the end in mind. You know the phrase, the end justifies the means? That sounds like a good phrase, but it's not true. In fact, most of the movies or TV shows you'll watch, the villain is doing really bad things to justify a better end. And that's not how life works. And actually, what is happening now is what we should be working towards with an end goal. So what our end goal is, we should be working towards right now. The choices we make now, we should be making them with the end goal in mind. For instance, if you want to run a marathon, a way to live with the end in mind, crossing that finish line, is to run every morning now, so you're in shape. So you don't just show up to the marathon and get halfway through and puke like the milk gallon challenge, right? Because you want to be in shape, you want to be able to be conditioned for that race. So you live now with that end goal in mind. The same is true in our walks, in our faith, and in our daily decision making. The goal is to live with the end in mind. And here's what Paul goes on to say in the next verse in Galatians. He said, "Those who live only to satisfy their own sinful nature will harvest decay and death from that sinful nature. But those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit." In other words, if you want to harvest something like a happy life, a fulfilled life, a satisfied life, then you will reap, you will plant in the Spirit, in your faith, in your prayer life, in your devotion to Jesus, in your decision making today. And that's really, really easily said, and it's really difficult to live out. And I know that probably me saying this to you isn't necessarily going to help you like oh, well, that's great information, Zach. I'm going to suddenly start making wise choices now. It's not that easy, and I get that. But what it does do is it helps us to frame the end goal and think about those things now so that the decisions we make now work towards that end. In other words, if you want to get to college and you want to have a faith that is able to withstand the difficult circumstances that will come up, if you want to have a faith that is able to weather the storms of rough life circumstances that may come later, if you want to have a faith that will sustain you when you're raising your own kids someday so that you can pass it on to them, then it starts with the decisions and the habits that you create now. It starts with making wise choices today. And this is basically what Paul is saying. We've got to live life in tune with God's Spirit. Otherwise, it's just our own selfish desires at work. And if we're not investing in the spirit of life, then ultimately the spirit of death, which seems fun in the moment, will win out in the moment every time. Some of you already know what that looks like. Some of you have yet to discover it, and I hope you don't have to. And Paul knew this. That's why he encouraged in the very next verse. This is what he says. So let's not get what? I'm making sure you're still with me and you're not. So let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone, especially to those of the family of faith. What he's saying is plant seeds in your faith, in your family of faith. Don't give up. It'll get tiring. But you know what? When we are tempted, you know the number one way to resist temptation is to have good, godly community around you to help encourage you and help you to never grow tired of doing what is good. Because if we're on our own, we'll talk ourselves into bad decisions all day. We'll justify our way into making decisions that will hurt our future now for the benefit of the moment. So here's the application. Remember to live your life, live with the end goal in mind. The goal is to make wise choices now that will lead to the growth of great things in our lives over time. So how do we do this? For starters, I think we all have to take a look at the seeds we're planting in our lives right now. What kind of decisions are we making? Are we planting seeds of distrust, of gossiping about people behind their back, about laziness, about skipping out on practice or that homework assignment, about just scribbling in so your math homework like right before the bell rings when you get to class, or of hard work when you are doing it diligently at home so you understand moving forward and ultimately stretch your brain in a way that is able to understand things better in the future because you worked hard on the little things now. We have to take a look at the seeds we're planting now in our lives. And we can all identify an area of our lives that needs change, that needs to have seeds planted in a better way, better seeds planted than the ones we're currently doing. And lastly, we can ask God for the wisdom, the strength, and the encouragement to start making better choices. In other words, here's what you want to think about. When you're living with the end goal in mind, you want to think about this. Someday, you'll look back on your choices and you will either say, I'm glad I did that, or you'll say, I wish I hadn't done that. Every decision you make, you will look back with one of those two phrases. I'm glad I did that, or I wish I had not done that. And the question right now, if you're living with the end goal in mind, is which of those phrases do you want to say when you're looking back at yourself a week from now, a month from now, 10 years from now? I wish I had done that, or I'm glad I did that. So as you guys get ready to go to your small groups, here's the question I want you to think about. What is one reason making wise choices is sometimes hard for me? I want you to think about that question. I'm going to pray for you guys, and then you'll go ahead and break out into your small groups.